The first Citizens Bank workers in Barbados are back out on the job this morning after a workable solution to the impasse was arrived at on Thursday night. Security Council met on Thursday to discuss the Afghan crisis and approved a resolution that establishes a formal relationship with a country ruled by the Taliban. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Gladys Quesada from the TeleSUR studios in Caracas, Venezuela. We begin with the news. Stay with us. The Argentinian Senate debates and votes on Thursday the agreement reached between the government and the International Monetary Fund to refinance the debt with the international organization. The session is scheduled for 2 o'clock in the afternoon time of that country. The debate comes with the support of the opposition bench. The Frente de Todos is confident that the bill will obtain a broad majority. According to the Senate's internal regulations, the initiative must be brought to the floor next week, when one of the payments to the international organization is due. In response, social organizations have announced that they will mobilize in front of the Senate to express their rejection to the agreement and to demand an increase in social policies in the midst of growing inflation. In Brazil, popular movements will take to the streets this Thursday in at least 21 cities to protest against the risk of evictions. The campaign, called Zero Evictions, seeks to fight for the extension of the argument of non-compliance with the fundamental precept granted in June 2021 by the Federal Supreme Court. This measure, in place until March 31st, protected thousands of rural and urban families during the COVID-19 pandemic. According to a report published by the organization, more than 132,000 families are currently threatened with eviction in Brazil. This is a 602% increase since the beginning of the pandemic. A Honduran judge on Wednesday granted the extradition request to the United States of former President Juan Orlando Hernandez to face drug trafficking and weapons charges. Our correspondent, Gilda Silvestrucci, expands on this.
Former President Juan Orlando Hernandez attended the hearing scheduled to gather all evidence against him. United States prosecutors have alleged Hernandez received millions of dollars from drug traffickers for protection.
He arrived here by helicopter, smiling. He doesn't have any problem. He's been checked every 4 hours by a doctor. The aides are bringing him food 3 times a day.
A group of his supporters gathered outside the Supreme Court of Justice, claiming the former Honduran president was innocent.
We came to support President Juan Orlando Hernandez so he doesn't feel alone. The people that led him to power are present here in the Supreme Court of Justice.
After a long day, the judge decided to grant the extradition of Juan Hernandez, but under certain conditions, such as not being prosecuted for crimes before 2012 or other charges than those established in the indictment.
I consider it appropriate to declare the extradition of citizen Juan Orlando Hernandez Alvarado, as stated in the request for extradition presented by the Court of the Southern District of New York.
The wife of Juan Orlando Hernandez, Ana Garcia, insisted that everything is a result of drug traffickers' revenge and political persecution.
It is a revenge and a conspiracy with strong political persecution motives.
The defense of Juan Orlando Hernandez will have 3 days to appeal the court decision, but it will be the plenary of magistrates of the Supreme Court of Justice who will define whether or not to grant the extradition request.
Hilda Silvestrucci, TeleSUR, Honduras.
Thank you, Gilda, for this report. And now we move on to other topics. New economic actors continue to grow in Cuba. The Caribbean island already has more than 2,000 micro, small, and medium-sized private enterprises and 49 state-owned organizations. From Havana, our correspondent Fabiola Lopez tells us more details.
This is perhaps one of the most magical places in Havana.
¿Y qué me dicen del área de los simuladores? Ya saben que les permitirán viajar en tren.
Here you can find the unimaginable under the maxim that fun is serious business. Talking trees, screaming monkeys, augmented reality, robotics, cyber cafes, or at 12D cinema to experience crazy sensations. The Finca de los Monos Technology Palace is one of the local development projects managed by Cinesoft Recreation, one of the 3 small and medium-sized enterprises created by the socialist state-owned company Cinesoft.
Medium and small-sized enterprises are born free. That is, they have a system of ownership relationship with the company that creates them, but they're very free at the time of their management. Therefore, they are born with the application of new salary systems. They are born with new purchase and sale relationships with other actors of the economic. They are born with facilities for exporting and importing, and they are born, above all, with the possibility of a more participative management of their employees.
Spiral Solutions is one of the new private ventures that now has the possibility of working in alliance with the state-owned company Cinesoft.
Today we have a framework contracts with Cinesoft for the development, maintenance, and repair of certain technological equipment, where we could not only give maintenance and repair to those that already exist and that at a given time may be obsolete, but also develop new solutions and modify solutions that already exist and that technologically do not have Cuban sovereignty because they are solutions that have technical assistance from abroad.
With the creation of the state-owned small and medium-sized enterprise EduMedia, which spun off from Cinesoft to manage audiovisual resources and informative and cultural software, Giselle Acosta is making her debut as an entrepreneur. She says that in a short time she has learned that you can have all the money in the world, but if the human capital is not adequate, the company will not be successful.
Another thing I have learned is the issue of customers. I think we have been working in terms of the company and not focus on the customer. And to be able to put a product, a service in a market where there is some competition, you have to think about the customer. When you manage to identify that gap and manage to satisfy that customer with quality, then you can also succeed in your process as an entrepreneur.
The government calls for increasing the presence of the non-state sector in exports, but the road does not seem to be smooth. One of the partners of the successful private small and medium-sized enterprise Guajiritos LLC, commercial partners of 70% of the travel agencies of the Ministry of Tourism in Cuba, assures that obstacles still remain.
The country's government is really close to what Cuba needs. There is a kind of intermediate layer that wants changes but does not know how to do it. The problem is when it is directed to direct. You have to be an entrepreneur. The entrepreneur takes risks. The entrepreneur practically does not sleep. He only thinks about the company, and as they are not entrepreneurs, it is difficult for them to change, and they get used to a way of working that they have been doing for 30 years. And those are the things that basically, I think, are stopping a product chain that we could have much better.
Experts agree that the challenge of the socialist state enterprise in Cuba is to become the locomotive of the national economy, not just a slogan, but the result of a truly efficient enterprise that complements the daily economy, that energizes the life of the Cuban people, that achieves an effective productive chain between the most diverse economic actors.
Fabiola Lopez, TeleSUR, La Habana.
Thank you, Fabiola, for this report, and we'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back to From the South. International organizations warned that the conflict in Ukraine will reduce global economic growth and increase inflation. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development noted that our first estimate of the war will cost the world at least 1 percentage point of its growth this year and up to 1.4% to the Eurozone, as well as the addition of 2.5% to the already high global inflation. The Paris-based organization warned about the humanitarian consequences that the conflict could bring. Also lamented that just when the world economy seemed to be emerging from 2 years of crisis due to the pandemic, a war situation erupts and will have global effects.
The war is causing a strong supply shock, which adds to inflationary pressures and disruptions already caused by the COVID-19 crisis. There is the significant negative impact on confidence, which in turn will negatively impact private consumption and business investment decisions. There is the developing impact on energy and commodity supplies, as well as disruptions to international trade and financial markets.
And Russia revealed that Ukrainian Defense Ministry laboratories received $32 million in funding from Washington. The head of the radiological, chemical and biological section of the Russian, Igor Kirillov, said that laboratories of the Ukrainian Defense Ministry located in Kiev, Odessa, Lviv and Kharkiv were developing biological weapons. He said such laboratories were functioning under conditions stipulated in a contract signed by the U.S. Department of Defense and the Ukrainian Health Ministry. Kirillov presented documents that prove the Pentagon's direct involvement in financing military and biological projects in Ukraine. And the government of Russia says chances of reaching an agreement with Ukraine on the Donbas conflict are very slim, despite negotiations underway between the parties involved. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said that the delegations of both countries have not been able to reach an agreement on a number of issues. He said Russia has clearly expressed its conditions and is expecting a response from Kiev. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said that a negotiated solution of the ongoing conflict in the Donbas region will be the best desirable outcome. Russia is demanding a neutral status from Ukraine to prevent NATO from expanding to Eastern Europe to protect its sovereignty and territorial integrity. On her part, Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova urged the United Nations organization to adopt an objective and impartial position on the situation in Ukraine. Zakharova said that the West reacts indifferently to the atrocities committed by Kiev against civilians in the Donbas region, specifically in the bombing of Donetsk on March 14th. Zakharova labeled the event as a terrorist act and said that the Kremlin will do everything possible to ensure that the crimes of the Ukrainian government against humanity do not go unpunished. Belarus President Alexander Lukashenko denounced Ukraine for ballistic missile attacks against his nation. Lukashenko assured that the military forces in Minsk managed to shoot down 2 Toksha-U missiles that were heading for the Belarusian territory. The president warned Kiev that if it continues with its provocations against the republic, he would be forced to respond. However, the Belarus president said that he did not expect to engage in a military conflict with Ukraine. He noted that Russia will not lose in the conflict against Ukraine and claimed that the West will not succeed in bringing Minsk into the situation. And we have more news coming up after a final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. The United Nations Security Council met on Thursday to discuss the Afghan crisis and approved a resolution that establishes a formal relationship with a country ruled by the Taliban, although the document fails to use such term. The Security Council voted the resolution, which only saw the abstention of Russia and attempts to secure the future presence of the United Nations in Afghanistan. The text presented by Norway modifies the multilateral organization's relations with Kabul after the Taliban movement came into power and have not designated a representative to the organization. In this context, Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that the Afghan population is facing one of the world's fastest growing humanitarian crises, and stressed that he has plans to assist more than 2 million people in need in the country, but has only received 9% of all the funds required for such effect. And on the occasion of the 11th year of the terrorist war imposed on Syria, Washington and its European allies announced their refusal to normalize relations with Damascus as long as President Bashar al-Assad remains in power. This stance, the Syrians say, will not prevent their country from moving ahead and towards, as Damascus plans to regain its prominent position in the Arab world. And in the regional and international levels, let's see.
Washington, London, Paris, Berlin, and Rome also assured not to lift the sanctions and not to contribute to the reconstructions of Syria, without first reaching a political solution that would lead to the departure from power of President al-Assad, a position that after 11 years of war and political, media, and economic pressures cannot change the reality that Damascus, thanks to its firmness in the face of the Western terrorist onslaught, once again opens its doors to welcome its Arab brothers after almost a decade of rupture.
The strategic geographical location of Syria in the east of the Mediterranean makes it a meeting point between the three continents through which the commercial transit routes to and from the Gulf pass, an issue that condemns to failure all Western attempts to isolate this country and distance it from its Arab environment, especially neighboring countries such as Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq, and the other countries east of the Mediterranean.
The White House's attempts to politically and economically isolate Syria in order to bend it to its will are not yielding results. Damascus, under the leadership of President-elect Bashar al-Assad, in addition to its Arab environment, is consolidating its relations with Russia, China, Iran, Venezuela, Cuba, and other friendly countries. These strategic relations cover all areas: military, economic, industrial, commercial, scientific, and cultural, and demonstrate that there are other spaces in the world beyond the United States and the European Union.
Russia, like other countries friendly to Syria, spares no effort to help the Syrian government and people to overcome the effects of the Western blockade, not only through the urgent delivery of humanitarian air parcels, but also by increasing and consolidating bilateral cooperation in all areas in order to improve the Syrian economy in the interest of Syria and its friends and allies.
While internally, the Syrian government is sparing no efforts to guarantee the requirements of agricultural and industrial production and oil derivatives, and to start up production in medium and small projects. This, together with the humanitarian support offered by friendly countries, seeks to mitigate the impact of sanctions that Washington and its allies refuse to lift on the lives of Syrians, and makes it possible for the Syrian people to remain firm in the face of Western plans that threaten their sovereignty, independence, and right to self-determination.
Hisham Wannous, TeleSUR, Damascus, Syria.
And now we move on to other topics. Yemen called for economic aid to address the humanitarian crisis in the country after more than 7 years of war. Yemen's Ministry of Planning and International Cooperation said it hopes to boost collaboration and with regional and international financial institutions to seek more support for the country's reconstruction and recovery programs. It also reported earlier this year that the conflict caused economic losses of $126 billion and inflation reached record levels, depreciating the national currency by more than 300%. Likewise, the domestic product fell by more than half during the period 2014-2020 because of the war. And the authorities of Mali have banned 2 French news media outlets, alleging that they are releasing false information about the alleged involvement of the Malian military in human rights violations. The Foreign Ministry said in a communique issued on Wednesday night, quote-unquote, the government of the Republic of Mali categorically rejects such false accusations against the brave Malian armed forces and reinforces a press ban on the shortwave broadcasts of RFI and FM and on France 24 TV channel in accordance with Mali's current laws and regulations. And like this, we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.